I can see it.
Okay.
Okay. So if you want to advance to the next slide.
Yep. You just give me the word.
Yep. Word. Is yours being slow too? Okay, great. Okay, so what we're going to do this evening is I want to thank everyone for being here first. Go back a little bit, one slide. We have Allison Craig with us. She's the Deputy Planning Director. And we have Laura Harmon, who's the Division Manager, of Entitlement Services. And we have some other UDO staff members here, Andrew Ossel, Yolanda Jones, Mariah Wozniak, Alan Goodwin, Kevin May, and I am Sandra Montgomery, who will be your presenter tonight. And I am the Planning Project Manager with the UDO team. Okay, so what we're going to do this evening is we'll narrate the presentation. If you have questions along the way or have questions that you have now, you can enter the question or the comment in the chat box, and that's just down below on the screen. And if you enter that comment there so we can see it, we'll attempt to respond to the questions and comments in the chat as I'm doing the presentation as they're submitted. And then we'll spend time at the end of the session to address any questions or comments that have not yet been answered. Next slide. Thank you. So meeting purpose is we want to help explain and clarify the contents of each of the administrative articles so that we can build some awareness of the key changes in the requirements. So I'm going to go over many of the highlights of changes in the UDO that will be coming forward. And last, to answer questions about what is included in the draft administration articles. Next page. Here is a schedule of our key UDO dates. The release of the first draft was October 7th of this year. We are currently in the public engagement phase where we're accepting comments on the first draft. And that will go through January 14th of 2022, although that date may be adjusted slightly. We may adjust that. We're considering maybe extending that deadline, but still maintaining the adoption date of July of next year. So we will release the second draft of the UDO in approximately March of 2022, again with more public engagement comments on that draft through April of next year. With the public hearing draft available then in May, with the tentative City Council public hearing date in June, Planning Committee recommendation shortly thereafter in June, with the adoption of the UDO in July. Next slide. We'll begin with Article 1. The UDO regulations do apply in both the city and the extraterritorial jurisdiction, or the ETJ. Any previously approved conditional and optional zoning districts will continue to meet the zoning regulations, site-specific plans, and the conditions under which they were approved. There are transition rules in Article 1 that apply to development and use-related activities, actions, and other matters occurring as of the effective date of the UDO. So violations will continue to be a violation unless the UDO makes the violation in compliance with the UDO. Previous development approvals can continue and be completed. And there is a use transition table in Article 1 that describes how existing uses will be treated if a use permission category table, the table 1.1, to kind of explain that statement there. The permitted use category is it a permitted use or is it a permitted use with prescribed conditions? And the new UDO category may be similar. It may be the same nomenclature, such as permitted use and use with prescribed conditions, but there may be a functional change based on that transition. For instance, if it's a permitted use with prescribed conditions now in the zoning ordinance, and it becomes the same permitted use with prescribed conditions in the UDO, what would happen then if there's some type of functional change, such as a subsequent addition or enlargement or expansion of that use, then that use would need to comply with any new prescribed conditions in the UDO. So if you're interested in seeing the rest of this table and understanding it better, please go into Article 1 and see the entire table to understand how that transition table works. Next slide. One thing that's new in Article 1 is that there's a state of emergency regulations that allow the suspension of application of part or all of the UDO regulations. This may be a declaration by the president, FEMA, or an imminent threat alert. This has not been in the zoning ordinance before, but it will be in the UDO. The effective date of the UDO is still under review. We're still considering if there will be a lag time and what it might be. So you can keep informed about that by going to charlotteudo.org for updates. Next slide. Article 36 talks about the different ordinance bodies and administrators. The powers and duties of the different bodies and administrators are discussed, as well as membership, hearings and procedures, how meetings are run, and staffing. This is for both City Council, Planning Commission, in addition, the Historic District Commission, and the UDO Board of Adjustment, which is a new board. That board will be handling variances and appeals. The Article 36 also has a list of the designated administrators and directors and their enforcement responsibilities and administrative duties. Article 36 also includes some conflict of interest regulations. We have those now in the zoning ordinance, as well as other ordinances for appointed boards and City Council, but it is new for administrative staff now that will be in the regulating the UDO. Next slide. Here is a graphic which shows the role of the UDO administrator. The position is not a supervisory position over the various administrators. The UDO administrator will be charged with the overall administration of the UDO. If there happens to be some conflicting regulations in the UDO, those would be decided by the UDO administrator. And they would, of course, manage the UDO Board of Adjustment. The different administrators are shown there in teal. We have the zoning administrator, the stormwater administrator, floodplain, soil erosion administrator, chief urban forester, and streets, sidewalks, subdivision streets and infrastructure administrator. And you can see there's the various articles that are under each administrator. Next slide, please. The next article is 37. It has to do with applications and interpretations. Applications are it's kind of within each department. They have their own application processes. Interpretations, the purpose here for interpretations is for citizens to obtain a written interpretation of UDO regulations if they wish. The process right now for an interpretation is very similar to the process that we have in the zoning ordinance. They would be submitted to the UDO Administrator instead of the zoning administrator. That's a new provision. And then the UDO Administrator would transmit that interpretation request to the designated administrator for the written interpretation. This would be provided both to the applicant and property owner. What is new in the UDO is it's new for the property owner to also receive the interpretation per some state legislation that's been incorporated. This written interpretation could be delivered by personal delivery, electronic mail, or first-class mail. Those are some new choices in the UDO. Next slide. Article 38, amending the UDO. This is a process, a text amendment process to change anything in the UDO, text, tables, graphics. There is really no major changes to the text amendment process itself. There's still an application submittal, determination of completeness, the public hearing, planning commission recommendation, and finally the city council decision. Petitions for text amendments where a decision has not been reached within 2 years of a submittal date results in the petition becoming null and void. This is new in the UDO. We don't have expirations for text amendments. And so this is a new item. Next slide. The next item in Article 38 is zoning map amendments, which we know as rezonings today. This is a process where a request is made to change a zoning district designation on a particular parcel or parcels of land. Very similar to the process in the current rezoning process. What is new is that no downzonings will be allowed without property owner consent. This is new based on some new state legislation. And another item which is new is for community meetings will be required for all zoning map amendments. These are conventional, conditional, and our new EX exceptional districts. Expiration of petitions for zoning map amendments. Again, this is new. It's very similar to the text amendment one, where if a decision on a zoning map amendment rezoning has not been reached within 2 years of the submittal date, the petition becomes null and void. Next slide. I saw it briefly for a second. There we go. There are three types of zoning map amendments. As I mentioned, conventional, conditional, and our new exception district. An exception district is classified as a conditional district. It takes the place of our optional districts in our zoning ordinance. It's another mechanism to modify the quantitative zoning standards. It's made primarily for new development concepts, innovative designs, unique proposals, or special problems associated with a particular tract of land. The standards cannot be waived in their entirety. No modifications are permitted for uses or maximum heights, and they must include public benefits that exceed the minimum UDO requirements. This EX district can be applied to 13 zoning districts, which I'm going to show you on the next slide. Alan?
Sandy, I just wanted to jump in to let you know that I'm not as slow as I may seem. There just seems to be a real time lag between when I change the slides and then when you actually see it.
Yes, I'm glad you announced that to everyone. We've been having some technical, slow internet issues here. So please forgive us for that. Thank you, Alan. So the 13 zoning districts where the EX district is permitted are all the transit-oriented development districts, all the regional activity centers, all the community activity centers, the neighborhood center district, the innovation mixed-use district, and the IC2 campus district, and the N2C neighborhood 2 district. 13 districts in all can have that exception provisions. Next slide. Going back to the public benefits associated with the exception district, they can be in one of these categories, one or more categories. So under sustainability, there could be design and architecture established standards, such as LEED, LEED, Energy Star, Earthcraft. There can be adaptive reuse of buildings or on-site renewable energy consumption are a few of the items that could be considered public benefits. Under public amenities, there could be an affordable housing set aside or publicly accessible open space. As for a city improvement, construction or improvements to streets, medians, bike paths, transit stops, etc., could be proposed as a public benefit. Next slide. Also in Article 38, there's a section on administrative minor amendments, which is similar to a process in the zoning ordinance now. This is a process to amend an approved conditional site plan or its conditions that does not significantly alter the site plan or its conditions, and the change does not have a significant impact on adjacent properties. What is new is that bike parking spaces have been added as a restriction for administrative minor amendments, so there can be no reduction in vehicular or bike parking spaces below the minimum or above the maximum. Another modification is that structures can't move closer to abutting properties in the N1 or N2 place types, or closer to single family, duplex, triplex, and quadruplex dwellings. This has been modified from the residential district or abutting residential use. So that is another change in this section to note. Next slide. Administrative adjustments, again, very similar to what we have in the zoning ordinance now. This is a process to allow for an adjustment of quantitative regulations in the zoning and tree protection regulations. Tree protection regulations has been added. As I said, it's similar to what we have now in the zoning ordinance, but what is new is that currently up to a 5% adjustment is permitted, and we're changing that in the UDO to be up to a 10% adjustment permitted. There's also some other adjustments permitted that are currently in the zoning ordinance for handicap ramps, encroachments to be compliant with ADA standards, encroachments into the frontage or the setback side or rear, or landscape yards for the replacement or restoration of historic features on an existing structure. This administrative adjustment process would be handled by the designated administrator. Next slide. Vested rights is included in Article 38. A vested right permits a property owner to continue use of or complete development on a property, even if the development regulations change. Right now, we have site-specific vesting plans. These are rezonings, are conditional exception zoning map amendments, which are good for 2 to 5 years based on if the applicant wants to require vesting. Subdivision plats are also considered a site-specific vesting plan. What is new is multi-phase developments. This can divest an entire development with regulations in place at the time of the site plan approval for the initial phase, and that is a 7-year vesting period. The requirements are that it have a minimum of 25 acres in size. It must have a master plan with elements showing the type and intensity of use in each phase, must be built in phases, and it includes zoning permits, site plan approvals, subdivision plat approvals, permits issued, and building permits. And of course, vested rights are also applicable to development permits, which are 1 year or more based on the regulations of how long their the vesting period is. Next slide. Permit choice rule kind of follows with vesting. If a permit choice rule is defined as if a permit application for development is submitted, and after it is submitted, but before the decision is made on the permit, rule, or ordinance, the rule or ordinance is amended, then the applicant can choose which version of the rule or ordinance applies to the application and use of land. The permit choice rule extends to rules and regulations beyond the initial application for developments requiring the multiple permits. That's new. We talked about that a minute ago. The applicant must submit subsequent permit applications within 18 months of approval of that first permit to use the permit choice rule. Signs and erosion sedimentation control permits do not count as initial permits. To make this a little clearer, next slide. Wanted to go over a few transitioning from our current ordinances to the UDO. The transition we recognize to the UDO can create challenges for development projects that are already in process. The UDO does include allowances related to vesting and permit choice, and we are still exploring some additional considerations. The adoption date versus the effective date of the UDO, conditional rezoning permits, petitions that are submitted prior to UDO adoption, projects that have initial permits approved prior to UDO adoption, and the impacts of the zoning translation through the UDO. Our intent certainly is not to create unnecessary burdens for property owners and staff. So we're still working through some of these additional considerations. Next slide. Variances, they are a request to deviate from an ordinance regulation that's granted on a case-by-case basis. Typically, they're granted when there's practical difficulties that exist to make use of the property difficult. They will be heard by the UDO Board of Adjustment in the UDO rather than the Zoning Board of Adjustment. The application and quasi-judicial process remains very similar to that in the zoning ordinance. The findings of fact have been standardized across the different articles and revised to add a reasonable accommodation for a person with a disability under the Federal Fair Housing Act. This is new per state legislation. There are no changes to the floodplain and water supply watershed protection variance processes. Next slide. Appeals. An appeal is a process for an aggrieved applicant to request a higher board of authority to review an initial decision in hopes of overturning that decision. So appeals can be made to orders, notices of violations, decisions, determinations, interpretations, compliance orders, stop work orders. There's a whole list here of different appeals that can be made, including proposed erosion and sedimentation control plan, disapprovals or modifications. Next slide. Appeals are heard by the UDO Board of Adjustment. Again, that's a new board. The application and quasi-judicial process remains very similar to what we have now. There is 30 days to appeal from the receipt of a written decision notice. That remains unchanged. There's still stays of enforcement and penalties when an appeal is submitted. And unchanged are post-construction stormwater control appeals, soil erosion and sedimentation control plan appeals, and drainage appeal processes. Next slide. Moving on to Article 39, which is on nonconformities. Nonconforming situations may continue if there are legally existing uses, structures, elements, and signs as of the effective date of the UDO that become nonconforming. They can continue. For nonconforming uses, they still may be changed to another nonconforming use within the same use category. Nonconforming structures may expand subject to certain standards depending on either the amount or the percentage of expansion in these zoning districts. Neighborhood commercial, regional activity center, innovation mixed use, TOD and campus IC2, and community activities CAC2 zoning districts. Incremental expansions will count towards the maximum permitted percentage or amount after the UDO effective date. Next slide. Nonconforming accessory uses and structures. This is a new category for above ground accessory utility structures or mechanical equipment. They may be replaced provided there's no increase in any existing nonconformity caused by an extension into a required side or rear setback. The other standards are that the replacement cannot exceed 42 inches in height if located in an established setback along a frontage. We have a new section on nonconforming exterior lighting that allows the zoning administrator to permit alterations to existing nonconforming lighting that would bring that lighting into greater conformance with the UDO. There's no changes to nonconforming signs and outdoor advertising signs or to the provisions for nonconforming lots. Next slide. And our last article, 40, is on inspections and enforcement. The UDO regulations remain similar to the existing inspection requirements for post-construction stormwater, signs, soil erosion and sedimentation control, storm drainage, subdivisions, streets, and infrastructure. The same with enforcement. The procedures remain very similar to the existing enforcement measures, except the criminal misdemeanors will be removed from the draft UDO per state legislation. That new legislation came out about the same time that the first draft was released, and we didn't have time to remove it at that point. The first draft, as I said, was released on October 7th. We will continue our community engagement meetings on the first draft through early January 2022. Comments on that draft, on the draft that we have now, will be accepted through January 14th of next year. There is some consideration given to adjusting that deadline, and that will be more information that will be available on the charlotteudo.org website, where you can get that any updates and more information. I would note that if that deadline is extended, that we're still shooting for a July adoption of the UDO. Next slide. Our online virtual conversations will continue to take place. We are about halfway, a little bit more than halfway through the virtual conversations. Each virtual conversation will focus on a specific topic, as you know, when you registered for this virtual conversation. They're scheduled for 1 hour in length, with one from noon to 1 p.m. and another one on the same day on the same topic from 6 to 7 p.m. If you're interested in any of the sessions in January, registration is still required to participate, and you can use the QR code on a flyer or go to the charlotteudo.org website to register for the next sessions. Next slide. Please visit the UDO website. The entire first draft of the UDO is available at the website, charlotteudo.org. You can see then you can provide comments on the draft UDO on the online platform, where the second arrow is pointing. It says read and comment on the UDO by topic. So you can move between topics that you're interested in to leave comments, and we encourage you to do so. Additional information, as I said, will also be available on the UDO website, including schedules, FAQs, and other information. There is also a reference guide available online. It's an easy to understand guide that will help you walk through the first draft of the UDO to understand better where specific information of interest or zoning districts is located. It also provides a summary of some of the new regulatory concepts for the city, including residential overlays, parking tiers, tree preservation, and transportation improvements. Next slide. And at this point, we're going to go to the chat. If you haven't opened up the chat at the bottom of the screen, please do so. And we're going to go over the questions and responses that we've received. So the first one is from Jay Banks, if I'm reading this correctly. And he asked, what is the estimated timeline for the administrative process? And Jay responded that, Laura responded, we're not sure if you're asking about the time frame for development review, if that will increase. And Jay said, not necessarily. If an administrative review is needed, will there be a defined review period, i.e. 15 business days? And Arista, who I forgot to introduce to everyone, Arista Stringas from Camiros, who is our consultant, answered that question, that the UDO does not contain specific timeframes for these applications as I've lost my place, as they move through the process. That's more of an internal process, policies that are not in the UDO. And does anyone else have questions of our UDO team about the content in the first draft for administration? You're welcome to add your comment in here or unmute yourself and ask a question.
Now, are me and Carl the only non-city people on here?
Jay Banks, Carl, and Addison.
Addison, okay.
Yeah. We had some additional people signed up, but don't think that they made it to our evening meeting. But we appreciate you guys coming. I'll give you a few minutes to think of any other questions you might have. If not, we thank you for attending.
No, I know this has been a long process for you guys. A lot of hard work has gone into all this.
Yes, it has, and still will.
Yeah.
Laura, do you have anything else to add?
No, other than to reiterate, thank you guys for attending tonight. We appreciate it. And if you think of any questions after this, just let us know. We'd be glad to respond.
All right, thank you.
I'll put in a quick plug for we have a January 4th meeting. If you guys have not signed up for it, if you're a frequent user of the development regulations, we're taking some time at that meeting to get into the sort of the nitty gritty of the UDO. So we're getting questions ahead of time. So if you register for that, submit your questions ahead of time. It's going to be a really good time to get into kind of the details of the UDO. So just put the plug out there. If you are in the development industry, we're really pushing folks to come to that meeting. So
I'd definitely be interested in it. Am I going to get another email like I did earlier today? Because I won't remember January 4th, I'll be honest.
I can reach out to you. I have your email, but we can we'll probably send another reminder to all of our project subscribers. So if you are a project subscriber through our website, you should get a notification.
Okay.
But other than that, you probably won't get a direct notification. You should do it. You are able to register online if you want to go to charlotteudo.org. There's several links to the virtual sessions and the upcoming meetings, and you should be able to find the registration link there.
Yeah, I got an email earlier today and it had that link on there and I went right in, registered, and I was actually late and it went right into the meeting, so it went well.
Good,
Okay.
great. Okay.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for coming.
Yes, thank you
Yeah.
all. Have a good evening and a great holiday, and we'll talk to you later.
Okay.